Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we are going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most important events is a call that took place between the 47th President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, the current President of Ukraine, Zelensky, and the businessman Elon Musk. Elon Musk, who participated in the conversation between Trump and Zelensky, predicts the war in Ukraine will end soon. He commented on the Newsweek that the Trump plans to create an 800-mile demilitarized zone along the front line between Russia and Ukraine, where British and European troops will be stationed. At the same time, Russia will retain the territories it has already occupied. The senseless killing will soon end. The time for warmongers and profiteers is over. That was written by Musk. Earlier, the Wall Street Journal reported that advisors are offering Trump an end to the war along the front line, securing the occupied territories for Russia, creating a buffer zone along the front line, which should include peacekeeping troops, and stopping Kyiv's integration into NATO for 20 years. You know that everything looks very good, probably, but with one exception. Russia will never allow Ukraine to join NATO. And as I understand, this is most likely the most important paragraph from the United States of America and Kyiv itself. And you know, this is a very interesting offer, and the thing is that there is one big problem with this offer, and I would like to explain to you. First of all, we understand that, let's say, if Zelensky refuses this offer, that means that United States of America will cut everything, any supply and any support to Ukraine, and sooner or later Ukrainians would be completely defeated if European Union doesn't support Ukraine with munition and weapon, which most likely European Union is not able to do. But everything is okay. If Zelensky doesn't accept, then the problems is going to occur. But when talking about Russia, currently nobody knows for sure what exactly is going to happen if Russia refuses this, let's say, suggestion, this proposal. What the United States of America is going to do if Putin refuses this plan? They will, let's say, make another sanctions. I'm not sure that this is going to work because the Russians, since the beginning of 2014, managed to find a significant number of ways how to avoid the consequences of any sanction that the United States of America created. So this is the main problem. We don't understand what kind of consequences the Russians will face if they refuse this plan. And as I understand, Trump is trying to play on these territories that the Russians have already occupied. And this is something like a deal. So United States of America and the Western countries will accept and will recognize these territories under complete Russian control. But the problem is that if I understand the Russians correctly, they will never accept this plan. They will accept this plan just in one case. There is one case when the Russians can do this. And this is the situation when the Russians are in so deep problems right now, economical, financial, social problems and so on. So this is going to be just the only option for them to survive. But when we talk about Russia, when we discuss the current situation in every sphere of this country, we see that they still have a lot of, power, a lot of strength to continue the special military operation and to at least reach the Dnipro River. So let's wait what is going to be next. Let's wait for the reaction of Russian Federation, and then we will be able to understand everything. And another important statement, while the Trump hasn't still get his power, there was one important topic that people were discussing during the previous 24 hours, that Iran plotted to kill Trump. That's ABC citing the U.S. Department of Justice. The Justice Department has indicated an Iranian regime official who was tasked with leading a network of criminal accomplices to carry out Iran's plans to kill its targets, including President-elect Donald Trump. So most likely, as this is already like 100% sure information, as I understand, and most likely after this situation, Iran will face the significant anger from the elected president of Donald Trump, and people are saying that the United States of America are going to sanction this country once again. Trump to renew maximum pressure campaign against Iran in the very near future, of course, after the 20th of January. Now let's move to the line of combat contact and let's discuss everything in details. And most likely, let's start first of all with this Kursk direction, where the Russians continue their counter-offensive operation. During the previous night, we have adjusted the map in the area of Pokrovsk. Let's discuss this in details. If you remember, just yesterday, the Russians, the official statement, the official channel of the Group of Forces North stated that the Russians managed to take under control the village of Orlovka, the village of Nova Sorochina, and the village of Stara Sorochina. And today, on the 9th of November, we got one photo. This is the photo I'm talking about that was published by pro-Ukraine mappers Deep State. And according to this photo, we can see the significant number of Russian vehicles, tanks, armored vehicles, personnel carriers that were moving from the north in the southern direction. The Russian presence in this part and the, let's say, direction of Russian movements confirms that most likely the Russians entered this part, this point from the north. So to get this point, most likely the Russians were moving in this direction. So based on this photo, we have adjusted the map. We have colored, let's say, 60% of Pokrovsk and 100% control of Marinka under complete Russian control. So these are the changes on the ground for the previous 48 hours since the beginning of the Russian counteroffensive. As for the 9th of November, according to information we have, currently the Russians are carrying out offensive operation in the direction of Mala Loknya. The Russians thrown everything they have in the direction of this small village with the purpose to take under control. And if the Russians are able to do this, if the Russians are able to take under control at least these territories, this will be the end of the Ukrainian group of forces that are currently located in this part, because this is the only road, these are the only roads that Ukrainians had or still have to supply and support their forces in this big pocket. If Ukrainians lose this territory, this is going to be the end for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians realize that most likely they will not be able to stop the Russian advance in this area, so that's why during the previous night and during the previous day, the Ukrainians were conducting several counterattacks in the direction of Zelený Shlях, trying to force the Russians to fall back and to unblock this road, at least for evacuation. For example, at least about this, we can make a conclusion based on the video that was published by the Ukrainians. In this video, we can see 17 separate heavy mechanized brigade of the armored forces of Ukraine, how they were counterattacking the Russian positions on the territory of the village by the name of Nova Ivanovka. The Ukrainian tank was attacking the Russian forces within a very short distance, and at least two places of Ukraine counterattack were discovered. The first position of Ukrainian tank was discovered in this point, the second one in this point. We don't know for sure whether the Ukrainians managed to restore control or to unblock the roads, but obviously they made these attempts, or maybe at least they were trying to force the Russians to think like this and to reduce the pressure on the line between Marinka, Pokrovsk, further in the direction of Mala Loknya. Now let's talk about the southwestern direction. According to information we have, it's the second pro-Russian resource that confirmed the Russian presence on the territory of Daryino. There are very heavy clashes, and according to information we have, after the Russians managed to take under control the northern part of the settlement, the Ukrainian forces were forced to fall back from Daryino in the southwestern direction towards the village of Nikolaeva Daryino. So this is the situation that was described by different sources during the previous night. The Russians continue their offensive, they're continue introducing additional forces, and obviously the Russians are not going to stop. We are not saying that the Russians are able to, to cut 50% of the rest of the Sudzha direction, but they will be able to take under control the most important positions, and maybe after that the Russians are going to introduce the North Korean forces to continue the battle for this territory. Furthermore, we got a lot of videos of how the Russians were FPV droning and attacking the Ukrainian units, Ukrainian forces in the Sudzha direction. Anyway, one we can say for sure, Despite the Russian progress during the previous 24 hours, we see that the Russians are moving much slower in comparison with the first wave of counteroffensive and the second wave. And the main reason of that is the significant number of forces that were redeployed by the Ukrainians in this direction. In the Sudzha direction, we can find the forces of the 47th Mechanized, of the 82nd, of different Territory Defense Brigade. We can find the forces of 41st Mechanized Brigade, 80th Air Mobile Brigade, and many other units, and some sources are saying that Ukrainians have concentrated the most powerful group of forces exactly in this direction, and obviously the trip for the Russians is not going to be so easy. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Toretsk agglomeration, because the number of updates that were published by the Russians during the previous night indicates that the Russians have already begun the final stage of the offensive operation, or they're about to resume their attempts to move further in the northern direction with the purpose to take the city of Toretsk under complete control. But this time the Russians, as you mentioned, maybe you've seen, maybe not, but the Russians, it was the longest operational pause since the beginning of the battle for Toretsk. The Russians managed to reach the central mine, the central landfill, and they stopped. They stopped attacking because they made several attempts to attack the central citadel, the mine itself. Most likely the Russians suffered losses. There were reports about Ukraine's counterattacks in the Zabalka district, where the Russians were forced to fall back, and now the Russians probably created another plan and they will soon try to implement it. But as I understand, according to the concentration of FPV drone attacks, most likely the Russians are planning to outflank the Zabalka district and the mine itself, and will try to move in the northern direction. And when the Russians reach the northern border of the settlement, the Russians most likely will try to turn to the west in the direction of Sherbinovka. So as I understand, the Russians are about to begin the outflanking operation with the purpose to take under control everything that located inside of this red line, and to encircle the Ukrainian positions in this mine and the industrial zone, and to force the Ukrainians to fall back as soon as the semi-encirclement mission is completed. Now let's talk about the Pokrovsk direction, and as for these territories, you can see, we can see the significant number of flags: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So up to 12, 13 flags in this area that indicates additional progress on the ground. First, let's talk about the western Selidova direction. Let's take a look at the map. Let's compare the changes. This is the situation by the end of the 8th of November. This is the situation by the beginning of the 9th of November. And the most important, that according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, pro-Ukrainian deep state map service, the Russians managed to break through and to answer the village of Grigorovka, Grigorovka, and to take under control at least one building or some network of buildings, and to create a stable positions, which most likely will force the Ukrainians to fall back from the same territories. Furthermore, during the previous night, according to the mappers, the Russians managed to take under control another company stronghold, and according to the geolocations, now the Russians control at least 4 discovered company strongholds on the line between Tsukurina, Zorya, and further in the western direction. And the Ukrainians remains under control just for 5 company strongholds, which is much less in their sizes in comparison with those strongholds that the Russians already captured. The Russians are moving further in the western direction, and the Russians, according to information we have, launched on first attempts to attack the village of Zorya. Currently there are very heavy clashes. Now let's talk about the village of Solntsevka. It's very interesting direction, because the first reports that the Russians attacked the village took place probably several days ago, maybe even a week ago. But since the first attempt, since the first articles and posts about the Russian attacks in this direction, we haven't received anything that can confirm this. Just different sources on the ground reported about the clashes, that the Russians managed to dig in deeper. But now, summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that most likely the Russians during the previous few days managed to answer the village of Solntsevka several times, but the Ukrainians were counterattacking and forcing the Russians to fall back. So this is the situation in this area. But as for the beginning of the 9th of October, we got probably the first more or less reliable mapper that confirmed the Russian presence on the territory of Solntsevka. At least the Russians managed to take under control several buildings on the first northern streets. As for neutral mappers, they're showing us and telling telling us that the Russians are about to answer, but the distance between the edge Russian positions and the village itself still around 2 kilometers. So let's take a look at how the map was changing exactly in this direction. This is the map on the end of the 8th of November. This is the map by the beginning of the 9th of November, and progress is obviously significant. But for now, without any geolocations that can confirm this. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Kurakhove direction, because according to information we have, Russian army fighters have occupied almost the entire territory of the city of Kurakhove. That was stated by pro-Russian sources. The Ukrainians are trying to resist only in the central part of the city, covering the retreat of the remains to the village of Dachne. So this is the village of Dachne, and the Russians are saying that currently the Ukrainians have already lost the battle for Kurakhove. Now the only thing the Ukrainians are doing is trying to organize the retreat towards the village of Dachne and to create the next, let's say, defense belt or next checkpoint for the Ukrainian forces that are going to about to retreat. And if anybody is going to retreat, most likely they will retreat through the village of Dachne. So according once again to this pro-Russian post, the battle for Kurakhove most likely will be finished within the next week. And according to the same post, currently the Russians are already in this part of the settlement, and the main clashes are taking place for the Kurakhove citadel. This is the part of the city that is located in some part in the central and in the western part of this very, very small but very, very powerful defense belt. So this is the situation in this area. As for other reports, so we see the second day or third day in a row we are receiving updates that the Russians are conducting the outflanking operation, getting closer and closer to the village of Dalne. So just yesterday we have adjusted the map to the south of Maximilianovka, and today we got first report that was given us by the pro-Ukrainian mappers that the Russians managed to improve their positions along these three lines, and that the Russians captured this stronghold. Once again, most likely the Russians are going to outflank Dalne, but before outflanking the Ukrainians through the village of Dalne, most likely the Russians will try to force the Ukrainians to abandon their positions in this artillery pocket, because if the Russians are able to take under control Yelizavetovka and Ilinka, where we can find right now very heavy clashes, most likely the Ukrainians that are currently located in this artillery pocket will be caught in cauldron. And the Russians are just trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back, and then they will be able, the Russians, to move further in the western direction with the purpose to finish the battle for Kurakhove itself. As for the southern direction, the Russians continue their mission in maintaining the line of combat contact. We have additional changes on the ground according to different mappers. The Russians improved their positions between the village of Trudovo and the village of Vadiana, and this information was confirmed both by neutral mappers and pro-Ukrainian mappers. As for Maximovka, the Russians improving their positions along the flanks and moving further and closer to the village of Sukhiye Yale. So most likely the Russians are planning to attack using these roads of attack, and the Russians will try to improve their positions using these roads of attack to get as close as possible to the river and to the village of Sukhiye Yale. As you can see, the situation for the Ukrainians is very difficult, very complicated. And of course, let's finish this video with the Zaporozhye direction, because the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces on the territory of Mala Takmachka. Almost every single day we start receiving more and more videos of how the Russians bombing Ukrainian positions there. So most likely, and something tells me that the Russians indeed are going to begin the Zaporozhye offensive operation, but they're going to start this offensive with assault on this village of Mala Takmachka with the purpose to take under control, first of all, the former prison that Ukrainians currently is using as the main stronghold in this direction. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.